All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. You are joining the Colorado Restaurant and Bar Show educational series. This is our 8th session. We are on Help Our Advocacy, how you can engage with your elected officials and the media to help us achieve big aims. And we're going to go ahead and let everybody join us, and then I'll be kicking it over to Molly Steineman, our Manager of Local Government Affairs, in just a moment. All right, Molly, if you'd like to take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Sally Ann. And hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. You are joining us again for the Colorado Restaurant and Bar Show virtual education series. I'm Molly Steineman, the Manager of Local Government Affairs, and today we'll be discussing advocacy skills and ways that you can effectively engage with your elected officials and the media to achieve big aims. Today, we are joined by my Government Affairs colleague, Nick Hoover, to discuss advocacy goals, and our communications team, Aaron Dewey and Laura Shunk, to discuss ways you can effectively work with the media. We will have time between the advocacy and media discussions for Q&A. Please submit any questions you may have using the Q&A function in your Zoom window. And with that, I will go ahead and pass things over to Nick Hoover to begin to frame our discussion for this afternoon.
Great. Thank you, Molly. Can we go ahead and get the next slide? So thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. Today, we're going to be discussing, as Molly pointed out, how to advocate for yourself and for your business to the elected officials. As we have said time and time again, you know, Sonia, myself, Molly, our lobbying team, we can talk to elected officials and tell them what you all are experiencing and how certain bills or certain times, such as COVID, are impacting the industry, but it comes nothing close to the type of reaction we get out of elected officials when they hear directly from their constituents. So today we're going to give you some very basic information on how you can advocate for your elected officials, give you some tips and tricks on how you can talk to them, how you can keep in touch with them, how you can maintain that relationship so that you can be as effective as possible moving forward. And I'm just going to stop real quick because my screen looks kind of weird.
Mine does too, Nick. Mine looks odd. It's cutting off part. There we go.
Better. That's better. Okay. So with that, this should be a good conversation. We hope we have a good discussion in the Q&A, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Molly to go over the first part of it.
The next slide, please, Sally Ann. So the first piece of advocacy, of course, is initiating contact with your elected official. And in order to do that, you'll have to know who your elected officials are. And so to give you guys some basic understanding, we've got local elected officials, state level elected officials, and then federal elected officials. Luckily, through the Colorado Restaurant Association website, you can access all of the elected officials, both for your business and home address. So if you go just to the CRA landing page and select the advocacy drop-down menu, click our Grassroots Action Center, and you can enter your business or home address, and then that will pull up all the information for you so you can contact your elected officials and so that you know who your elected officials are. There's also some very helpful information with that site there. It'll tell you which committees your elected officials may serve on. It'll also supply just some background information so you can kind of frame your discussions with them. And whenever you are initiating contact with your elected officials, make sure you always identify yourself as a constituent. Just like Nick said, you know, he and I and Sonia have these conversations all the time, but a constituent carries a tremendous amount of weight with an elected official. They're there to represent you. So make sure you're identifying yourself as one of their constituents when you have these conversations with them. Next slide, please.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and take it from here. And Sonia, thank you for pointing that out. We are going to go ahead and make this off the record conversation with our members. So if there's any media on this at all, this is an off the record conversation with the CRA members. So first things first, when you get in contact with that elected official, you're going to want to be clear. You're going to want to be specific. These elected officials at the state level in the 120-day session could look at as many as 800 pieces of legislation in that time. The best way to make your conversation productive and effective is to know the bill number and know the issue that you're talking about, and go ahead and tell them the bill number and tell them the issue. And the reason the bill number is important, there could be 4 or 5 bills introduced on one specific issue. And if you don't tell them which one you're talking about, they're going to be confused the entire time. Your conversation is going to be less effective. So just go ahead and get those specifics out. right off the bat. It's going to help the conversation as you move forward. If you've met with that elected official in the past, tell them, remind them. They might have remembered you. They might not. They meet a lot of people. Don't be offended if they didn't. But remind them that you've met in the past, mention where you were, the context of that meeting, give them a chance to refresh their memory. And when you get into that conversation, get straight to the point. Especially during the legislative session, elected officials schedule their, especially the busier ones, will schedule their day in 15-minute increments, sometimes even less than that. Get to the point right off the bat, state whether or not you're in support of the issue or opposing the issue. Have an elevator pitch down and ready to go so you can be clear and concise in what you're describing to them, the issue you're describing and what your position is. Ask if they're familiar with it. Ask if they've already made a decision. They might have. Ask if they've made a decision, and that'll help with the conversation moving forward. One of the key things, though, is regardless of where this elected official is on this issue compared to you, be respectful, especially when you disagree. It's never going to be effective to make an enemy or burn a bridge over a temporary issue. I can't tell you how many times we'll be having conversations with elected officials on one issue where we're just on the polar opposite of them. And then an hour later, a day later, maybe later in that same conversation, we're talking with them about a bill that we're on the same side. And if you burn that bridge, you're not going to be able to have productive conversations with them on other issues that are going to impact this industry. And probably more important than anything else, make it personal. Make it personal to your business. Okay, talk about what's happening. Talk about how it would impact you all. Talk about the pros, the cons, how it's going to change your business, how it's going to help your business, whatever it is. Give them real world examples of what the legislation would do to you. That way they can understand it, they can see the impact, and it'll help just move that conversation forward in a good way. Next slide, please.
And the biggest key, and kind of where we would like to encourage you to focus a lot of your efforts, is establishing a long-term relationship. And ideally, we would like to see industry participants and industry stakeholders having these conversations and establishing those relationships outside of the legislative session and separate from a certain specific legislative issue. And so a really good way to do that is if you've contacted this elected official, if you've been in a meeting with that elected official, follow up with them after the meeting via email or phone call and thank them for their time and consideration. You know, even if they ended up not voting on the issue the way that you would have liked to see them vote, make sure that you convey that you appreciate them listening to your input and that you would like to continue that dialogue and other issues going forward. And keep that contact going. If you only care about alcohol to go, but there's another sort of employment issue that's coming up, please continue to contact your elected officials on other issues as well. What we really want to really solidify with our elected officials is that you guys as industry participants, as business owners, as restaurateurs, are industry experts, and you guys have insight and experience and attention to detail that other people may not. And so your voice is incredibly important, and we want to make sure that they know that you are an industry expert for the restaurant industry, and they tie your name and they tie your communication with restaurant related issues. And, you know, keep that going outside of the legislative session. Invite them over to your business and walk them through and show them, you know, this is what my restaurant looks like. This is who I am. This is the amount of people that I employ. This is a fundraiser or an event that we have coming up, and encourage them to participate with you in any business related activities. A really good way for you to kind of keep in touch with them over time is to follow them on social media. If they have a town hall in your area, stop by and say hello. You know, really kind of, it doesn't have to be a full-time job. Like, you don't need to be consistently once a week contacting this elected official. But if you continue that communication, if you put your name and your face out there, over time, they will learn who you are, what your business is, and they will start to rely on you as an industry expert and reach out to you proactively when they're considering industry issues. Next slide, please.
So Molly touched on this a little bit, but it's really important to present yourself as a resource and as a place that they can go to get accurate and appropriate information about the issues that are going to be impacting the restaurant industry. The reason this is important is because let's say you reach out to them specifically on, I don't know, alcohol to go or a tip credit fix or something like that. If you present yourself to them as a resource, talk about your training, talk about your education, talk about your experience in the industry, you present yourself as a resource, a week later, 2 weeks later, maybe a year later, they might sit there and go, I remember talking to the restaurateur who owns this place, and they had some really great insight on this restaurant issue. I'm now looking at a bill that I think might have a restaurant impact. Let me give them a call. Let me chat with them again and see what they believe is going to be the impact of this legislation. That takes your one conversation past that initial conversation on the initial issue and brings them in, helps you bring them into almost a relationship with you moving forward, which is going to make your communication with them so much easier and so much more effective. Follow up after you have your conversation, follow up with emails with a thank you email, a follow up, kind of more information if needed, giving maybe some more specific data, showing your expertise in your knowledge of the industry to really solidify that you can be a resource, you can be a help for them. If you go into that conversation, if you're on a phone call with them, if you met with them in person and you didn't have a chance to give them maybe specific changes or specific amendments to the piece of legislation you're talking about, follow up with that in an email. Let them know, help them draft that language so that they know what's going to be helpful to the industry. And then repetition is key. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Have your pitch down, know what it is, and repeat it. Follow up, make sure they understand. If you didn't get an answer or a commitment or a promise out of them in that initial conversation, keep following up, try and get something out of them. Make sure that they know you're listening, you're paying attention. I wouldn't do it daily, but definitely within a short period of time after first contacting them, give them some time to review it, follow up, make sure they know that they're going to have to get back to you with an answer, with a response. And that'll help them retain the information moving forward. Next slide.
And so, yeah, when you're having these conversations, as Nick mentioned earlier, it's really important that you speak from the heart and you try to be as authentic as possible. And really share real life examples of how this legislation will impact you, as opposed to kind of speaking high level and, speaking in theory or speaking in large concepts. It's much more effective for you to have a very direct conversation saying, if you pass, the X, Y, and Z bill, my business will be impacted in this following way. Don't try to make it too political. Don't try to debate the elected official, but really just share with them honestly and earnestly, this is exactly how this would impact me. And I would like you to please consider my feedback or my support or my concerns with the measure as currently drafted. And again, please be respectful, even if we lose their vote. It's very important that we continue to have that open dialogue. The worst thing in the world down at the Capitol is to have a closed door to a member that you no longer have access to because of an unfortunate conversation. So, even if we aren't seeing eye to eye on this issue, we probably will on the next. So it's important that we continue to keep that, that friendliness and that collaboration going. Next slide, please.
So getting access to your elected officials, Molly gave you a great resource earlier about how to find out who your elected officials are. And in that resource, you'll also have the ability, you'll see their email, their phone number, the Capitol phone number. Those are great ways to reach out. Also, we send out a lot of call to actions. There should be calls to action. There should be one coming out here shortly around the alcohol to go issue. That's also a great way to break the ice and have maybe your first contact with an elected official. As Molly said, we'd love to see that outside of a session, but those calls to action are a great way to get that started. And then maintain that contact moving forward. Also look at their social media. A lot of elected officials are on social media constantly right now, where they might be publishing public events that they're hosting or a town hall. Stop by if there's an issue that you feel strongly about. Stop by that town hall. Tell them, make your voice heard, because if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu, as we like to say. So take the time. Make sure your voice is going to be heard. Social media is a great way to find out where these elected officials are going to be when they're talking to their constituents. And then if you are having a hard time reaching one specific elected official, because maybe they're just not getting back to your email or they're not answering their Capitol phone number, reach out to us. We can help set up a meeting directly with you. Molly and I and our lobbyists have a lot of their cell phones and other email addresses to get a hold of them if need be. So if that ever comes up, please don't hesitate. Reach out to us. Request a private meeting. A great thing that you can do. A lot of the elected officials at the Capitol don't have your experience. They're not restaurateurs. Invite them to your restaurant. Show them around. Bring them in the back. Show them the kitchen. Show them your entire establishment, how it runs, so that they get an idea of the type of business you're running. That can make your conversation with them so much more personal, so much more effective. And do it outside of session even. Bring them in, maybe host one of their town halls if outside of COVID, once we're allowed to all meet again. Host one of their town halls at your restaurant if you'd like, and get that time before or after to chat with them. But like I said, also, you can use us as a resource for gaining access to these elected officials. Trust me, as Molly and myself and our lobby team, we're professional stalkers at the Capitol. We know how to get a hold of elected officials if we need to. So we'll definitely help set up that meeting if need be. Next slide, please.
So yes, just as a wrap up, really view yourself as a resource, as someone who's here to feed information to legislators as they're considering policies, and make sure that the industry's voice is heard. You guys know more about running a business and running a restaurant than I or Nick or any of the legislative officials or elected officials could ever know. So we need your voice, your history of experiences, your specific knowledge of some of these situations in order for us to build good policy and collaborate on good policy with elected officials. And again, always identify yourself as a constituent. They are there to represent you. You are the person that is voting within their district. They are there to carry your voice through at the Capitol. So make sure that when you're having these conversations that they know that you are a constituent, that you care a lot about what they're working on, and you would like to open a dialogue with them. Next slide, please.
So right here is Molly and my contact info. If you have any questions about how to get in touch with your elected official, if you need some help even figuring out who it is, or if you want to chat with us before you have that conversation with your elected official on maybe what are the talking points we're using, where has this person been with us in the past or against us in the past, please feel free to reach out. I know, shoot us an email. My cell phone's in my email signature. I believe Molly's is as well. You can always use my cell phone. I think Molly would, I don't want to offer it up, but she's nodding her head, so I'm going to say yes. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions on how to advocate effectively, how to have these conversations, or if you want some support going into it. That's what we're here for. And I think now we are going to take some Q&A, if I'm not mistaken, on the advocacy stuff.
Yes, you are correct, Nick, but I don't see any questions here in our Q&A window yet. But if you have any other questions, please feel free to enter those in. Nick and I will stay on through the media discussion, and we can definitely answer these either through the chat or also through the recorded version as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're moving on to the media section. So, hi, I'm Laura Shunk. For those of you who don't know me, I am the outgoing VP of Communication. I'm taking over as the foundation president, but I'm still handling communication and the communication department at the association for now. So please continue to use me as a resource. Erin Dewey is also on. She's our communication and membership coordinator. She is a great resource as well. So we're going to talk about some things that you can do to help us enhance our legislative agenda as we kind of come into this season, and also hopefully things that you can take back and use to your own advantage as we move forward here. But if you ever have questions about media related issues, you're always welcome to reach out to us. So if we go to the next slide, I think my contact information, oh, it's going to be on one of these slides. But so in this era in particular, we've heard loud and clear from many of you that the media needs to hear more of our stories because the public needs to hear more of our stories. So the best way for us to accomplish that is for you all to reach out and make your stories heard, to tell, to get to know your local reporters, and to tell them your stories and to talk about what's happened to you during this extraordinary time. And that is going to give, as those stories get out into the public, that's going to encourage the public, not only to understand what you're going through, and so to hopefully have more empathy as they come out and dine with you, but also to take action. So as we're working on, legislative priorities that directly impact this industry, having heard your story, the public is more likely to engage. So how do we successfully do that? So we can go to the next slide. So here's how to establish media relationships. So it's easier to get your story out into the media if you already have an existing relationship. Nick and Molly talked a little bit about positioning yourself as an expert, positioning yourself as somebody who can be a resource. The same goes for the media. So elected officials knowing who they can reach out to when they've got questions about restaurants. There are reporters who want to know who to reach out to when they've got questions about restaurants. They're often reaching out to us. So we will contact members and restaurants that we know to answer those questions. But, get to know them yourselves, because they will call on you when they are researching issues that are related to our industry. So how do you do that? Some of the basics: research the outlet. For this industry, obviously look for the food writer, or the food, the person who covers sort of food stories with TV stations. There tend to be one or two reporters that go heavily toward the restaurant industry. So making sure you're targeting those people, because they're the ones who are going to be assigned articles that are related to the industry. Write them a note and introduce yourself. Shoot them an email, tell them about your restaurant, encourage them to contact you in sort of more normal times. You could invite them in, to have a drink or just sit down and kind of get to know you. This works especially well, obviously, if you've got something that you want to talk to them about, and that would specifically, it works especially well if you've got kind of a timely, what we would call a timely hook. So, the legislature is about to vote on alcohol to go. You want to reach out to a reporter and tell them about why alcohol to go has been super important to you during this time. That's going to, they may be looking at an alcohol to go story anyway and looking for a resource, and now all of a sudden they've got you. And then follow up. So, reporters are getting sometimes hundreds of emails a day. So if you've got something to tell them, make sure that you're continuing to follow up until you get a response. Don't be so aggressive about it, maybe, but I think one or two follow-ups is completely appropriate. All right, so next slide. So how to convey your message. So this is, especially in this era, this is important, because what we're doing is, it's not simply necessarily about come on into my restaurant, have a meal and write about it or tell the story of my restaurant. We're really trying to be targeted in a chorus in asking for specific legislative needs or specific items. So really trying to distill that down into some core messages. If you've seen interviews with us over the course of this pandemic, you'll notice that we've focused on a few key themes. Restaurants have told us that they need cash and capacity more than anything else. We say that in just about every interview we give. Focusing on sort of statistics around what is happening within this industry, focusing on always sort of asking, for more. So with the state, here's, for example, they roll out a new program, say the 5-star program, giving some feedback, on what we see with that program, and then always kind of following that up with restaurants need more cash and capacity. So that's kind of an example of how you can roll those core messages into basically any interview you give. So in this, as you're kind of putting together those key messages, stick to the facts. When you're talking to reporters, it really, especially on these issues, it really is about your experience. So any context you can give them that shows the devastation that you've been a part of, that, you know, how you've weathered the storm, the economics, that is going to go a long way in sort of selling your point during this time. So as you're talking about alcohol to go is one that we have on here, you know, being really specific about the fact that alcohol to go makes up a certain amount of your revenue, or alcohol to go enable, you know, so pinning that message to how it's enabled you to stay open. You know, we talk a lot about some key things, namely how long people can stay open, how many people they've had to lay off, and how much revenue is down. So anytime you can echo those kinds of points in your messaging, that really gives a good contextual picture for the entire industry. And again, if you need help with some of those statistics, we're happy to help you with that. You can give us a call, and we're happy to give you kind of our data. It's publicly available data, so you're welcome to use it, and then you can use it in context of your own story. And then finally, as you're putting that together, the major thing here is your call to action. So talking about what you need. So I mentioned restaurants have told us over the course of the pandemic that they really need cash and capacity. So, you know, your message is probably going to be specific to whatever it is that you're being interviewed on. So if it's the alcohol to go bill, perhaps you're asking specifically for the alcohol to go bill to be passed so that you can continue to have that revenue stream. If you're talking generally about the state of the industry, you may be asking for the state to find a faster way to open restaurants up, or you may be asking for meaningful cash relief. So focusing on sort of a specific call to action that you can kind of tuck into those key messages and continue to come back to as you go through the interview. Next slide. So what to do if the media approaches you? So those last two slides dealt with how to get your message out and sort of how to put it together once you've connected with the media. But we often see the media directly approaching our members and restaurants on a variety of issues. So just a couple of key points on that as that happens to you. Ask before you agree to an interview. It's completely appropriate to ask for an overview of the story, especially if you think this is going to be on a controversial topic. So, that could be in a controversial topic is different for everybody, right? Everybody's got their own comfort level and sort of speaking to the nuts and bolts of our business. But we've had reporters this year ask for some pretty, what I would say is maybe information that normally people would want to keep private. So information about financials, or information about, people being on the brink of closure, things people may not want to publicize. So before you kind of get into the interview, it's appropriate to ask them what their story is about, what the angle is. You can ask for them to send written questions if that would help you sort of figure out what you're going to say. Obviously that's going to be more difficult for a TV interview, but getting a sense of what they're looking for before you commit to it. And then you can decide whether you want, once you do that, you can decide whether you want to answer the questions. And you are always welcome to refer media to us, especially on those controversial issues. We're here to respond on behalf of the whole industry. So if there are issues that you don't want to talk about, you don't feel comfortable talking about, you don't think is worth, you putting sort of your face on it in a public sense, send them to us. We're happy to field those. And then, same for this type of interview as for the other type of interview where you're doing the approaching, prepare your talking points and stick to them. So think of the kind of 3 things that you want to come out of the interview, list them, and then come back around to them over and over again as you're going through the interview process. And even if the question, there are ways to maneuver that. So if the question is, if the reporter asks a question that's not quite related to your talking points, you can find ways to pivot around to that. And that's another thing that we are happy to help you with. So happy to help you, figure out happy to do some media training with you, happy to do some practicing with you so that you can figure out how to make your talking points work within the context of what a reporter is writing about. So that's kind of the high strokes, like the broad strokes of the media approach. And just again to emphasize, you know, the media, us telling our stories publicly is going to has a big effect on what we're able to do from sort of an advocacy and lobbying standpoint, because it creates public pressure on our elected officials. The CRA is undertaking a big, proactive public relations campaign this spring. So we will also be trying to push these stories out into the media. Erin is collecting stories of how people have weathered COVID throughout the course of the pandemic, sharing those on social media. We'll be amassing them to potentially share with the media. So we continue to put out sort of calls for those in our newsletter. So if they're, please heed those calls and send us your information. But again, I just want to reiterate, you're welcome to do this sort of proactively for yourself as well. And we're happy to help you put together those talking points. So I think with that, Sally-Ann, go ahead and go to the next slide. So there's our contact information. So if you ever need help, please feel free to reach out to us. With that, I think I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions. All right, it doesn't look like we have any questions. Anybody for government affairs questions or on anything else the CRA is working on at the present time?
And as a reminder, if you can't think of a question now and something comes up to you later, you've got, Molly had to jump, she had to go to another meeting, but you've got Laura's contact, Erin's contact, Molly's, mine. If something comes up later that you need answered as well, please feel free to reach out. But if you have a question now, please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window.
All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up then. So thank you everyone for joining us. And yes, if you have additional questions or you want to get involved, please reach out to us.
Oh, looks like it's a thanks. It just says thanks. You're welcome. And one last thing from the advocacy team, we quite often hear from people that they're nervous about getting involved in advocacy, or they're not sure how to do it. The big thing is just remember, they're people too. The elected officials are people too. They all have day jobs. There's 3 in the Capitol that are restaurateurs. They know your experiences. Treat them like people, they'll treat you like people, and trust me, it's not as scary as some people think. So thank you very much for joining us today.